Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on October 30th, 2025. If we have any webinar first-timers in the room today, know that our Cathedra webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about empowering tribal communities through land revitalization solutions, launching the next generation of tribal technical assistance to Brownsfields, or the Tribal Tab program. You actually are going to have three instructors today. We have Aral Salters, who is with the Tribal Tab program at Kansas State University, Todd Barnell, who is the Waste and Response Programs Manager with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, and Bailey Richards, who is with Contaminated Sites Program with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could tune in for the webinar today. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here. Just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Speaking of the materials, you can always go back and find them in the courses section here on the learning platform. And I have also included a link to the presentation slides for you in the chat. And you can also find it in the shared notes. Anytime you come in for one of our webinars moving forward, you'll just click on that green banner to join like you did today. We do ask that you try to join with listen-only capabilities. It just helps to cut down on audio feedback for the recording. And if you have joined and you notice that the sound is coming out of the wrong device, maybe you're trying to use your Bluetooth headphones, maybe you have a speaker. If you come down to the bottom of your screen, you might not have a telephone like me, you might have a little headset icon. But if you click on that, you can bring up a list of your speaker devices and you can select the correct audio output. We do, of course, encourage class participation. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments, and we'll primarily rely on the public chat. So if you don't yet have that expanded, you can come over here to the messages platform and click on public chat. And then anything you'd like to say or ask, you'll just click on the box that says send message to public chat, type what you want to say, and then you can hit enter, or you can click on the little paper airplane button and that'll submit it in. We also have a list of helpful links for you in the shared notes section. If you did join with your mic on, not a big deal at all. You could come down to the bottom of the screen and mute yourself with the mic icon. And then if you ask a question or make a comment and you think maybe we missed you along the way, feel free to use the hand raise feature to draw our attention to it. No problem there. We'd love if we could find out who all is joining us for the webinar today. If y'all wouldn't mind taking a moment going into the public chat, let us know your name, where you're tuning in from. It's nice to see all the different tribal nations that are represented, your work or your role in Indian country that maybe led you to today's webinar, and then your tribal affiliation. You might be a tribal employee and not have your own tribal affiliation. That is okay too. And while y'all are introducing yourselves in the chat, I just have a quick final note for you. Please try your best to not click on the big red menu panel that's to the far left of your screen. Yours might not be expanded. You might just be looking at those icons. But just know that if you click on it, it's going to actually pull you out of the webinar immediately and take you to whatever you clicked on. There won't be like a, hey, are you sure you want to leave the webinar message? So you can always just click on the green banner again to join back in if it happens. But I just want to give you that heads up that it could happen. All right. As you guys are introducing yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce the first instructor, who is Aral Salters, and I have made you presenter now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brooke, and really to the Native Learning Center team overall, Georgette, and the amazing network of presenters and professionals that do all of the good work in Indian country. And thank you all for tuning in and being a part of this conversation. We really appreciate that. It's an honor to be here. To talk to you all and present with my good friends and collaborators, Todd and Bailey. And really, we want to talk about tribal brownfields as the powerful platform that it is, and as we think about it as a program, as a set of resources, and really as ultimately as healing medicine for communities. And so we'll get into some of the things that we do and the resources available and how that can help your tribal communities continue to grow and prosper and really thrive, sometimes during these kind of challenging times. And this really builds on a conversation that started a few years ago with some of our friends and colleagues with the Native Learning Center and the podcast that involved Eugene Goldfarb, Cynthia Nett, Scott Nightingale, Mickey Hartnett and others, and that kind of set the stage. And now that we're in this new iteration of Tribal Tab, we really want to advance that conversation and help raise the awareness of all the great things happening and how you can get involved. And really, when we think about brownfields, we'll get into some of the mechanics of what that entails, but when the reality is brownfields really intersects with so many different aspects of tribal governance, whether it's environment and energy, when we think about economic development, when we think about commerce, natural resources, land management, agriculture, human services and healthcare, there's a brownfields component. And then of course, infrastructure and housing, all the good work that so many of you are involved with. All of those have a role or a thread that connects with brownfields. And so we look forward to talking about that more. So in terms of our conversation today, I'll talk a little bit about the big picture with our Tribal Tab programming and who we are and how Kansas State University, the Center for Hazardous Substance Research fits in. And then I'll turn it over to Todd to talk about the great work happening at ITEP. And then Bailey will pick up and all the amazing things happening in Alaska. And then we'll have an opportunity and share some space for some dialogue and conversation and hear from you all, hopefully. So who are we? Well, Tribal Tab is actually a collective of partnerships, collaborators. We're centered at Kansas State University, but in this new iteration, this version of Tribal Tab, it's not just Kansas State University. We're very much committed to our core partnership with ANTHC and ITEP. In addition, we have a really robust network of partners at other universities. We work with a series of different contractors and consultants that understand Indian country and can really provide services on the ground. And we also have an array of cultural specialists that can help us with any given challenge. We assemble the right team, provide that kind of customized technical assistance to help you achieve your goals. And the real driver or objective here is we're passionate about helping support and protect, and in wherever possible, if we have to help in supporting the restoration of sacred tribal lands, we're here for you in all those different capacities. So with Kansas State University, we've been doing this work for a long time. We're housed in the College of Engineering. But the reality is we're very much a multidisciplinary team, folks, that have been doing this work for a really long time. It started actually back in the 1980s with some of the new laws and legislations that were coming out when it came to NEPA, hazardous waste with RCRA or CERCLA. We were contacted by policymakers that wanted to really understand some of those and the implications for industry, for communities, for nonprofits. And so our founding director, Larry Erickson, was really instrumental in bridging that gap and really pushing that information, that knowledge, those innovations far beyond the university and really understanding the needs on the ground. And so ever since then, we've been doing that work. We're very, very much committed to helping communities be successful. And we exist at this intersection of environmental protection, community building, economic development, cultural resilience. And we continue to evolve and grow and enhance our partnerships to accomplish this work. And as I noted, we've had a long history of being able to be successful in that space. Most of our work has been federally funded through EPA and through other sources. And this just gives you an idea of some of the different programs and projects we've been involved with over time, whether it was Superfund support or some of the early versions of TOSNAC providing outreach to Native communities. We've been very much committed to really lifting up communities and helping to understand what the needs are and then come up with viable solutions that are sustainable. And we've done that in a variety of different ways over time. I'm going to talk briefly about a couple of different programs. One is the American Geophysical Union Thriving Earth Exchange. We were selected to be a community science hub for that program. And that includes all indigenous communities, not just federally recognized tribes. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll really dive deeply into our Tribal Tab program that is US EPA funded from headquarters And that allows us to provide free outreach, free services, free assistance to all federally recognized tribes and intertribal consortia, and working with Alaska Native villages. And it's amazing work, but the need is great. And so we look forward to hearing from ITEP and ANTHC as we've expanded that network. So this is just an overview with our AGU efforts, and it just helps illustrate. We've worked in a variety of different spaces with these projects, whether it's water quality in Hawaii, or salmon protectors working with youth with the Nez Perce, or waste management with Fort Peck, community gardens and transferring knowledge with the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes, working to really understand the land assets and mapping both natural and cultural resources in Texas, or actually addressing wastewater, land management, composting and biosolids with the Prairie Band Nation, Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. We're involved with a lot of different activities to really help those communities that are locally defined, working with community leaders, and also working with scientists, engineers, whether it's space science, whether it's earth science, utilizing that AGU network and coming together with their fellows, and through our hub being able to support those projects and find the right fit. This is an example with the Navajo Nation, working with K through 12, the recognition that so much of this starts early in that K through 12 pipeline, helping really understand the best of science, thinking about regenerative agriculture. And then this also helps with, help young folks build confidence, solidify his identity, and then really building that long-term community resilience. So this is a project we've been really excited to be a part of and help advance. And these are projects that really we just launched the last couple of years, but we really excited about those next steps. So now we'll talk a little bit more about our real heart and soul of our work in Indian country, which is the Tribal Tab program. And so this is, we provide all federally recognized tribes, all 574 are eligible for Arbor services. We work across Indian country, but we'll talk a little bit about brownfields, and then also the Tribal Response Program, which is often an entry point or a way to get started with capacity building with tribes in brownfields. This is just an example of where those TRPs are located throughout the country. There's over 100, and that's grown from, I think, maybe about 30 in the early 2000s. And so we've seen some growth there, and it really provides capacity building. It's a program that helps tribes recognize what brownfields are and help build that program, and then gain momentum to get other sources of funding and technical assistance, community visioning, to really be successful in the long term. And so for those that may be unfamiliar, what is a brownfield? And so really what these are, they're sites, they're properties, they're living lands that really may have stalled, whether it's an abandoned gas station, whether it's some kind of a former industrial area, or maybe it's just something that's underutilized. But for whatever reason, they become kind of stuck there in terms of being able to utilize that site. And so what we try to do is just help communities establish a vision and make those unknowns explicit and help that move forward. And there's myriad benefits associated with that kind of revitalization. There has economic benefits. It can create jobs, help utilize existing infrastructure, really, natural resource, environmental protection. But one of the things that we feel like is kind of unrecognized, or is an opportunity, is for tribal governments to recognize this is a real step toward self-determination and sovereignty in terms of cultural resilience, because automatically, rather than going through the tribes' states kind of a process to recognize that kind of parity, it's inherent in the program itself. So it's a powerful lever, and it really brings folks together across the nation, across the tribal nation, different departments, different units, to come together and really serve those locally defined tribal goals. So it's taking something that really could be a vulnerability or a risk and transforming that into an asset. And so the process itself, we've established, these kind of steps. It's a sequence, but it's very much nonlinear. It's iterative. So it really starts with bringing the community together. And we've braided that together with indigenous storytelling just to help, illustrate how this process can happen, what's involved with that. And so again, starting with that community vision that provides kind of the context and background, then we get into the characterization, the actual investigation with the environmental site assessments. And this really establishes, who are the characters involved, what are the main themes, what's the real challenge, and then we get into the remediation and cleanup if that's needed. This helps kind of highlight and crystallize what the real challenge is, and then we work toward the reuse, the redevelopment, and how we resolve that, and then that ultimately culminates into the long-term vision, the stewardship, the sustainability, the balance of social ecological systems, and then making sure that we revisit that and we're thinking about that intergenerationally. And so this is an important process, and this is how we approach the work that we do, and working very closely with community leaders and community members to be successful. And how we accomplish that work really is with our partners. And we have this network that I mentioned before. We have a few different focus areas. And what makes us different than some of the other wonderful TAP providers is very much we're focused on storytelling and visioning and bringing that to fruition. We work closely, as I noted, with the tribal response programs. And, given some of the challenges and complexities of funding and financing in Indian country, we're working with partners to really help navigate that aspect of it, and then leveraging that into the kind of conventional brownfields continuing with assessment and cleanup and reuse. So we work with a variety of collaborators that help us do that, whether it's in the kind of design stage or planning or on the ground, working with architectural and engineering firms and different folks positioning these for renewable energy, thinking about nature-based solutions, and ultimately all of that coming back to storytelling and helping really understand and share that message. And we do that through a variety of different mechanisms. First and foremost, we're really helping communities build capacity locally. And so we have an array of e-tools, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, how that's done. In addition to the storytelling, we do workshops, webinars, conferences. And if you haven't, speaking of conferences, the annual Tribal Lands and Environment Forum that Todd and his team do, TLEF, is just a magnificent gathering. And so we do a lot of the brownfields work there and sharing and listening. And then we also do a lot of one-on-one assistance, that kind of community outreach, coming together, whether that's a workshop or some kind of a charrette or gathering. We really try to leverage the local community activities and culture and understand what those needs are, and then help formulate a good plan moving forward. And so we can help in a variety of ways. This is just kind of an overview. One of the things we're most proud of that's really been successful the last couple of years has been the Tribal Brownfields Knowledge Circle, which Todd, Bailey, and their teams have really helped facilitate and kind of weave together, and then having all of the peer communities and tribal professionals come together and share knowledge, best practices, challenges. It's been just a beautiful experience. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, these are just some of the things we provide in helping support local community and brownfields goals. One of the things we're also very committed to is really thinking about this in a very regenerative way. We're not just coming in, doing a project, it's a one-off, and then we're gone. We're very much interested in long-term relationships, building those partnerships and collaborations that are really going to endure through time. And that's so important when we think about job training, workforce development, and really integrating that kind of local knowledge and traditional wisdom in all that we do. One thing I just was going to mention, and this was a milestone when it comes to TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and thinking about how do we invite that into the space where we're doing our assessments or when we're doing cleanup or redevelopment and visioning. EPA slowly recognized how important that was, and then was very much helped galvanize that with across programs. And so whether it's CERCLA or RCRA or Brownfields in this case, there's a commitment there. And so we like to remind EPA, and we have a wonderful set of partners there at the regional level and with headquarters, just how important that is. And if tribes want to share that information, how we can hold that sacred, how we can utilize the data sovereignty, but also integrate that into the real solutions that we're formulating. Again, coming back to storytelling and really how important that is, we've been working with a variety of partners, including collaborators at UNM, Dr. Ted Hohola, and doing podcasting. We're really excited about one that's underway now, working with Rose Bay Audio, Caitlin Armstrong. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act is such a pivotal, complex, highly impactful piece of legislation, and working with ANTHC to help tell that story, working with the communities and get that on the ground village perspective to help understand how that's reverberated throughout Alaska and beyond. So those will be forthcoming. So we're excited about launching those early next year. And as I mentioned, the Tribal Brownfields Knowledge Circle, this is really a safe space to share, to listen, to learn. We get together quarterly. We share information, best practices. We have speakers. And then as an outgrowth of that, based on the demand, we're actually meeting monthly now in an informal way, just to talk about those kind of things, how we navigate some of these challenges that are happening in the contemporary context, but really being there for each other, listening, sharing, laughing, crying, whatever that entails. The Brownfields Knowledge Circle is really a great platform for that. So if you're interested, please reach out and we'll get you connected to those opportunities. Again, this is just how we do the work. These are some of the mechanisms involved. I've mentioned e-tools. We do have free e-tools available. Our new website is under construction collectively with ITEP and ANTHC, and we're going to have the Tribal Brownfields Forum there to share information, a real library of things, and connecting with the good work that's already happening and making sure that you all have the information and the tools that you need. So we have grant writing tools through Tab EZ if you're interested in a competitive Brownfields grant. And then we have the Brownfields Inventory tool, which is a very, very pragmatic, really effective way of gathering information. It's protected and it helps you manage your program or build your program and really help launch that program into a successful, good way. These are just some of the different kind of things that we do to help get the information out, provide trainings, share information, and get connected. I mentioned the one-on-one assistance. That really is kind of, just a key aspect, being on the ground, walking the land, working with communities, listening and gathering the right folks to help solve those locally defined problems. We have different frameworks that help us do that. Yeah, and this is our existing website information. If you're thinking about a tribal response program, if you have one, if that's already been established, or you're thinking about how can I make this more robust, how can I really fully utilize that, we have some tools and trainings that can help you do that. And this is just what it looks like at the community level when we're thinking about transformation, when we're talking about resilience. An old BIA boarding school at Concho, and this was just a very powerful story and an example of taking something that has history, that has culture, and through those kind of locally defined goals, helping transform that and support that process into what could be. So much of this work is about getting folks together, whether they're elders, whether it's youth, whether it's folks working for the nation, and just having a conversation, listening, learning. Oftentimes involves, looking at maps and looking at visuals, telling stories, and really developing the products and the projects and the tools to build a really vibrant future. And, this happens oftentimes in these kind of gatherings, bringing folks together, sharing a meal, and just spending the time to have those kind of deep conversations and look at a site and understand all the different dynamics. And these are just some examples from Alaska. And really those end products, what could it be? And so we have folks that are planners, architects, landscape architects, graphic designers that can help us come up with some cool visuals that we can utilize actually for other sources of funding or just community, really establishing what that vision is, utilizing different tools and imagination to come up with those things and then bring that into fruition and create that reality. And I know it's a lot of information, so we'll have a good discussion later. But now I'd like to turn it over to Todd to talk a little bit about the amazing work that they're doing and how we collaborate to achieve those goals.
Well, thank you, my friend. And thanks to all of you for inviting us. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to share your space. So for those of you who I have not had a chance to meet, my name is Todd Barnell, and I work for the Institute for Tribal and Seminole Professionals. I've been with ITEP now since 2002, and as I mentioned, I actually manage all of our programs associated with response. ITEP actually was formed in 1992, and we are a 100% federally grant-funded organization. And the whole point of ITEP is to listen to and assist in any way we can tribes, nations, native villages across the country with a variety of their environmental programs. The different types of programs that ITEP actually covers, we have air quality, both indoor air quality and ambient air quality. We have my program that's focused on waste and response, which I'll talk about a little bit more here in a second. We have a program that actually is focused on water quality issues. We do environmental education, tribal pesticides, tribal data issues, including data sovereignty through the Tribal Exchange Network. Program called the Tribal Wellbeing 7G program, which is probably our largest now. That actually climate change, adaptation, resiliency, first foods, a variety of different issues that can sometimes sort of cross over across different technologies. For my program, I have a team of 3, including me, and part-time research assistants that lend assistance. We actually cover 5 different environmental media. So one of those is brownfield, which we're here to talk about today. But my team and I also work with our tribal colleagues when it comes to Superfund, solid waste. That includes all aspects, transfer stations, collection, recycling, composting, all of those kinds of issues. We also work on underground storage tank issues, and then we have emergency response programs. The crux of what it is that my team and I actually do across those 5 different media, we do our work through several different kind of key projects that we do. One of those, as Aurel mentioned, is our Tribal Lands and Environment Forum. This is an annual conference that we do in every August, and we've been doing it since 2010. The Tribal Lands and Environment Forum is very comprehensive because it actually has to cover all of the 5 media that we're actually working in, which can sometimes just be a little kind of fill your head. So we have 5 different concurrent tracks that go on during the week. One of those being focused primarily on solid waste, one on Superfund, one on brownfields, one on underground storage tanks, and one on emergency response. Those breakout sessions are happening all week long during the conference, but we also have time set aside for more in-depth training on an awful lot of different issues. We do field trips where we actually go out into the broader community where we're holding the TLEF that year, or oftentimes we will work with neighboring Native nations and be able to take folks out so that they can actually see and experience what is actually going on out there on the land. We're really kind of excited because this last year, for the first time, we were able to finally organize a volunteer opportunity as part of a couple of those field trips, where our attendees, they were very excited about that, they were able to actually go out and lend a hand to their tribal colleagues and stuff as part of the field trip. The TLEF also has a lot of different types of special events. We spend an awful lot of time gathering together in talking circles. We were thrilled, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on, that we were able to work with the rest of our colleagues at Tribal Tab to have the first Tribal Brownfields Knowledge Circle talking circle as part of the TLEF, the last one that we just did a couple months ago. And the TLEF itself, if you haven't been to one, we'd love to have you. We typically have over 500 people actually come in person. And then we also, the TLEF is done as a hybrid. So you can actually attend and participate as a virtual attendee as well. And we usually have over 200 virtual attendees joining us each year. In addition to the big conference that we do, we also do trainings. So we will do online trainings, much like the Native Learning Center is doing here. I will actually say you guys are much more professional than I usually am when I'm doing my virtual training. So massive kudos. I love the Native Learning Center. We also do in-person trainings, and we also develop self-paced online training courses on a variety of topics. And these are multi-module courses that somebody can go ahead and dive into and kind of work through as their work schedule allows them to participate in that. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of that and how it relates to some of our work with Tribal Tab. My team and I also actually coordinate the Tribal Waste and Response Steering Committee. Some of you may be aware, if you have to work with EPA an awful lot, there are 7 different, what are called official tribal partnership groups. And each one of those kind of covers a different environmental media. The Tribal Waste and Response Steering Committee was something that under an EPA cooperative agreement I designed and developed back in 2009. This is composed of 10 different people from across the country who are working for Native nations in one or more of the 5 media that we actually cover. They are a phenomenal, amazing group of people. They have become very, very close, become a family, quite frankly, to themselves and also to me and my team. And one of the many things that they actually do is they create their biannual priorities document, where they actually spend a lot of time talking to all of you out there on the front lines, also using their own knowledge that they gain from their work. They meet every December in Washington, D.C. with senior EPA management, and they bring those priorities to them. And they have very intense conversations with EPA of like, these are what we're hearing from our tribal colleagues of what the challenges are. These are priorities of things that could actually make things a lot easier or work an awful lot better. We don't go into budget numbers. We actually focus on what are the programmatic and policy and regulatory issues that can actually best help tribal nations do what they need to do. And I stress that to all of you because that is something that the TWAR Steering Committee is always looking for feedback from other folks. If any of you ever actually are interested in learning more about the priorities document, please go ahead and contact me. I can direct you to our current one as well as all the past ones. And I'm very gratified that, you know, a lot of times we meet with our federal colleagues and sometimes it can just sort of be like, you know, banging your head against a wall. What we've been able to achieve over the years with the TWAR Steering Committee, I'm really proud of like what they've been able to actually do. EPA senior management actually gives us written responses 2 times a year, a midpoint check-in, and then also at the end of the year of how they're doing on these priorities. So there is a real sense of accountability and responsibility as well as reciprocity that goes into that. And that's something that my team and I try to actually bring into all of the work that we do in all of our different projects. Outside of brownfields, another one of the specific things we do is we do work and coordinate the activities of the Tribal Superfund Working Group, which is a group of people who work on Superfund sites, but quite frankly, we have a lot of brownfields people actually also working because one of the things I guess I want to stress to you is if the concept of brownfields are new to you, one of the things my team and I always say is like, if you got something that's headed in the direction of a brownfield or it's become a brownfield, get in there and do what you need to do. Because you don't want it to go to the next step, which is Superfund. And that is a whole other kettle of fish. And so I really enjoyed working with the Tribal Superfund working group, because it's a network of very dedicated, compassionate, and just hardworking people who come together so that they can actually share knowledge and they can learn from one another. Working with them has been one of the more gratifying parts of my 20 plus years of working in this field. Last thing I want to actually mention on this is our Tribal Lands and Assistance Center. This is a website that we actually created, an online community where we actually try to develop resources that can help tribal professionals who are working on all different types of contaminated sites. So there's a lot of Superfund resources on there, but there's also some brownfields resources. There's things on petroleum contaminated lands. And every year, my team and I kind of focus in on a particular topic that people are telling us that they're sort of struggling with, and we do research for the year and then try to develop a new page that actually has a lot of different resources. One year we kept hearing from folks, and this was the height of the pandemic, that they were really concerned about the loss of institutional knowledge. We were losing far too many people. Lots of people were leaving their jobs, and there was a great deal of kind of a brain drain that was happening for an awful lot of tribal nations. And so what we decided to do is we created a series called Superfund Our Stories, our SOS series. And I would sit down on Zoom with one person who was retiring or already retired from a tribe who had been working on Superfund, and we would kind of dive into one or two different things that they really wanted to make sure that the next generation knew about, that they wanted to share their stories on particular topics. So we're continuing to actually do that. It was kind of a big push for 1 year, but it was a fun way for me just to kind of sit down with somebody else, and we have all of those recordings available on our TLAC website. So the last thing I want to mention here, I guess, is how my team and I integrate what it is that we do as part of our work with under our own cooperative agreement, how we actually try to bring some of those things into our cooperative work with the rest of our colleagues here at Tribal Tab. First and foremost, I am extremely proud and very gratified to actually be able to work with Raul and his amazing team, with Bailey and her amazing team. I've known both of them for many years, and it's really exciting to be able to bring that kind of energy and all the expertise that all three of us can be able to share with one another, and to try to create opportunities for sharing, but also create new resources, provide that kind of technical assistance. It's something that means a great deal to my team and I. One of the things that we actually did recently, before we even really started working with our colleagues as part of the Tribal Tab collective, we did a couple of day virtual training course on brownfields issues, where we were linking brownfields into tradition and culture. We had been hearing from an awful lot of people who were working on brownfield sites, or who suspected that maybe they needed to be working on a brownfield site. And the concerns were in terms of like first food, native plants, the rest of our relations. What can we be doing with some of these sites that Aurel was talking about earlier, to be able to strengthen and sort of like reawaken land, but also reawaken culture. So we reached out to a bunch of folks that we knew. Even more exciting, I actually met some people that I didn't know. And it was really frustrating to me of like, how in 20 years have I never actually like had a chance to meet you? And we brought them together to share their stories on a variety of different approaches that they were actually taking to brownfields. And they really ran the gamut. So we did this virtual course for a couple of days, and afterwards we realized, my gosh, we really need to actually create an online course that would actually sort of bring some of the clips from the discussion that we had in that virtual course, but also provide some additional resources, provide some opportunities for people to do their own research, and also provide an opportunity for people who were taking that self-paced course to connect directly to Tribal Tab. So we recently launched our brownfields land restoration using traditional food, plants, and culture on our online training platform. So again, if you're at all interested in taking a look at that or any of the other online courses we have, please reach out to me. But it's really exciting because it's just an ongoing sort of process of people taking this course. Within, I think it was like 5 weeks of us releasing this course, we had over 107 people actually like register for it and start going through it. And so it's been kind of a nice way for us to meet other people who maybe we just haven't met in any other context, and to be able to put them in touch with Tribal Tab. We've also worked very closely with Tribal Tab as part of the work that we do with the TLEF. As I mentioned, we were able to actually do a special Brownfields talking circle as part of this year's TLEF. And it's one of those things that, working especially with Oral and his team and Bailey and her team, we try to incorporate them as much as we possibly can into our Brownfields track. And they've been doing a phenomenal job on that, as well as offering other opportunities for people who are coming to the TLEF to be able to go on Brownfields field trips. This year, we actually had 3 different Brownfields field trips that we offered. And one of the things that I really appreciated hearing from attendees afterwards was we had quite a few people who actually went on one of those Brownfields field trips who don't come from Brownfields background. The bottom line is that even though the TLEF might have those kind of concurrent breakout periods focused on those media, as we all know, every one of those media touches upon culture, it touches upon health, it touches upon community resiliency. The climate crisis affects every single one of those things. And so there's a great deal of cross-pollination that takes place at the TLEF. And I love the fact of being able to hear from some people of, yeah, I went on that trip because it sounded kind of cool, and I wanted to go see that tribe's land, but now I actually get it. I guess maybe we might have a brownfield. And that wasn't something that they were necessarily kind of keyed in on because they were focused on something else. So I think it's finding those opportunities where we can kind of bring the threads together is one of the things that my team and I try to bring to our work with Tribal Tab. As Oral had mentioned, the Tribal Brownfields Knowledge Circle, that actually is one of the things that I'm enjoying the most working in this partnership, because there's nothing that my team and I like more than being able to foster a safe space for being able to share. The years I've been working on this, yeah, sure, I've got certain knowledge, but it never ceases to amaze me of how often we can find ourselves kind of getting a little bit siloed, especially, after the pandemic. We're all just wearing so many hats and we're trying to do so many things. And now going through the current situations that we're actually facing and having to deal with the government shutdown, it can just become a little bit overwhelming. And so sometimes we spend all of our time inside of our own head. And it's really nice to be able to just take a moment, even if it's in a virtual context like that, of just being able to come together, hop onto a Zoom call, see some of your colleagues, see their smiling faces, and just start talking and sharing. One of the things that I had noticed when I was putting together that online course where we connected culture and brownfields, one of the people who came and actually spoke was from a tribe that had a new office back on their original homelands. And the people in that office were actually working on brownfields, and they had never actually gone for a brownfields grant. They actually just found completely different funding sources because they didn't actually even know that they were part of a broader community. And so by being able to bring them into that training, now they're actually being able to connect with other people through the Brownfields Knowledge Circle and realize, oh, there are other people out there who are actually doing the kind of stuff that we're trying to do. We don't have to necessarily reinvent everything. We can actually learn from our colleagues. And so that's one of the things that we my team and I try to bring, I guess, to our collaboration with Tribal Tab as a whole, is to be able to figure out ways that we can do that. And I sincerely appreciate all of you for actually coming, and I appreciate the Native Learning Center for being able to once again kind of give us that space that we can interact and learn and share from one another. So with that, I am going to turn this over to my friend Bailey.
Great. Thank you so much, Todd. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Bailey Richards. I'm the Contaminated Sites Program Manager at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium in Anchorage. I want to say thank you so much to Brooke and the NLC team for having me on the webinar today. This is such a great resource. It's my first NLC webinar. I'm sure it will not be my last. If I'm looking back and forth between screens, it's because I'm looking back and forth between my notes, so bear with me on that. But Aral and Todd have already covered a lot of the really fantastic services that Tribal TAP provides. I didn't want to just rehash what you've already heard when I was thinking about what to say in my portion of this presentation. But one question that we sometimes get asked is, what's going on with tribal brownfields up in Alaska? And why is there a specific tribal TAP assistance provider for Alaska? So I did want to use my time to offer some context for that and talk about some of the challenges that tribes in Alaska are facing when they're working on contaminated sites. Some of these challenges are unique to Alaska and the Arctic, but I'm sure that many of them aren't. So as we're going through these, I would love to hear from other regions and folks from across the country. If you all can relate to these, maybe we can brainstorm some solutions together. Just a little bit about me. I've lived in Alaska my whole life. For the last 10 years, I've been working at ANTHC on supporting Alaska tribes on contaminated site issues. This is just a map showing some of the tribal communities I've worked with on contaminated sites, either personally or on an assistance team. There are 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska, so I often feel like I am barely scratching the surface still of everything going on across the state and all of the great work that's happening. But I do feel really fortunate to have worked with so many folks in so many different places. I did want to say up front that, while I work for a tribal organization, I'm not a tribal member, so I can't speak for Alaska tribes on what their contaminated site priorities are, and every community is going to be different. But what I can offer is my own personal observations, just based on my work in this field and conversations I've had with tribes over the last 10 years about their struggles and challenges working on contaminated sites. So helping to bring more attention to those barriers is one of the aspects of my role and our program that I feel most passionately about, and that's also part of why I wanted to focus my presentation around that. A little background about ANTHC and where I work. The Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium is a nonprofit, tribally owned tribal health organization. We're headquartered in Anchorage, and we are a central healthcare provider for all Alaska Native people. We own and manage the Alaska Native Medical Center, which you can see in the photo to the right. This is the main hospital where tribal members statewide can go to receive IHS healthcare in Alaska. It's also the only level 2 trauma center in the state, which we're pretty proud of. And we're also the largest tribal health organization in the United States, actually, with around 4,000 employees. But we don't just provide primary healthcare. ANTHC also works kind of on a holistic health model. So we have other divisions besides the hospital that also provide public health education, engineering, sanitation, and environmental health services, which is where my program falls. So because ANTHC is already positioned pretty well as a central resource for tribes in Alaska, our Contaminated Sites program is funded primarily by EPA to act as a central designated technical assistance provider for Alaska tribes on contaminated site issues. And as part of that role, as mentioned, we are the Brownfield Assistance Hub for Alaska tribal entities for the Tribal TAP program. So we work really closely with Aral and his team at Kansas State, Todd and his team at ITEP, and other Tribal TAP partners across the country to deliver those services. There's such a large constellation of entities and experts working on contaminated sites, not just in Alaska, all over the country, and it's quite vast. So our program aims to be, as much as we can, a centralized hub for support resources. And, just knowing that it can be sometimes difficult to navigate everything that's out there and know who to contact for what. So we maintain a pretty large network of working relationships with other entities. Tribal Tab is one of the main ways that we do that. So if we don't have an answer to a question, we help connect the tribe to someone who does. I won't go into each of these individually, much to your relief, I am sure, or I'll provide a great overview earlier, but this is just a high-level menu of services that we provide to Alaska tribes working on contaminated sites. And we went with the menu option because one of the first questions we get is always, how much does it cost? And so we want to, be very clear with any tribe that we talk to or are working with. This is all, free services that we offer. We're already funded to provide that. So just now that you know a bit about me and our program and where we are, I want to start out talking a little bit about Alaska as a whole, just to set the foundation for some of the contaminated site challenges that tribes are experiencing here. So starting off just with size, just so we have a common understanding of kind of the land area we're dealing with. This is Alaska superimposed over the contiguous states. Some of you may have seen this before. It takes quite a while for us to get around, as you can imagine. Additionally, just, demographically looking through that lens, Alaska's home to around, I think right now it's around 160,000 tribal members, Alaska Native people. That's around 20% of the state's current population. And around half of all Alaska Native people live in very small, remote communities that are also very small in this map. Let me see if I can, okay, cool. I was told that this would zoom earlier. So you can see some of the distribution of villages on this map. And the blue lines are our road system. So as you can see, the vast majority of communities in Alaska, around 86% actually, are not accessible by road. So we're very heavily reliant on planes, boats, ice roads in the winter, and other forms of transportation to reach these communities. And so that changes the way that we do our work and also some of the ways that contaminated site work needs to take place as well. And on average, the population of communities off the road system in Alaska is fewer than 500 people. So just to give an idea of kind of the scale that we're working with on some of these projects. Oops, there we go. So looking at a community level, in rural Alaska, the cost of living on average is around 32% higher than it is nationally. That's on average. However, that said, there are some pretty key resources that are even higher than that. So just as one example, many rural villages are highly reliant on home heating oil. So I don't know how many of you may have used home heating oil before, but currently the national average is, I looked this up a couple weeks ago, $3.57 per gallon for home heating oil. In NAHASDA, Alaska, which is an off-road system community in Northwest Alaska, it costs $13.77 per gallon. So that's a $10 difference. So, just living costs across the board can be incredibly challenging for folks living in rural communities. And, there's also some other compounding factors there. Many communities use a mixed cash subsistence economic structure as well, which is different than a lot of larger municipalities and cities in other states and areas. Folks in rural villages often generate their cash income from kind of a patchwork of different sources, part-time and full-time work, seasonal labor. A lot of people do commercial fishing, or, a variety of other activities. But one common thread is those are often used to support and supplement subsistence activities. And I really cannot overstate how important subsistence practices are in many rural communities. I'm sure that that's not unique just to Alaska. That's important to a lot of folks across the country. But subsistence practices, including sharing traditional food sources, hunting, fishing, gathering, in addition to being a really important cultural practice, it significantly offsets the high cost of living that I was mentioning earlier, and really empowers residents to keep living in areas that don't have as many long-term employment opportunities as there are elsewhere. So, the numbers do back up just how important subsistence is, because each year Alaskans in rural communities harvest an average of 300 to 400 pounds of food per person just through subsistence practices. So that's really huge. So yeah, I mean, there's any number of things that I could say about how unique it is living in rural Alaska communities. But it comes with its own unique challenges. And so that certainly extends to contaminated site work as well. So drilling down a little more specifically into contaminated sites in Alaska, again, just emphasizing that these are from my own perspective. This is one that I'm sure many people here will be able to relate to, capacity. But small tribal communities in Alaska are often assumed, from people who have not been up here before, to have administrative capabilities that are similar to those in your average American town. In reality, in a lot of cases, a single tribal administrator manages a lot of different roles for a community. They're not always the only staff member for the tribe, but they wear a lot of different hats. Similarly, there might be one or two environmental coordinators for the tribe and the community who are funded through the EPA, Indian General Assistance Program, if you all are familiar with IGAP. But they work on a really wide scope of environmental issues in their community. So, they're typically not contaminated site specialists necessarily. It's relatively rare. This isn't always the case, but relatively uncommon for tribal staff to have formal education or training in things like soil and water sampling, at least to the level required for brownfield assessments. So if a tribe wants to do work on contaminated sites and move them through the assessment and cleanup process, it's either going to involve training and figuring out how to source that and pay for that, or more commonly, what happens is hiring an outside contractor. That involves a lot of travel, time, and money to get out to rural communities. And this is also something that I've heard a lot of people mention from outside Alaska as well, is just high turnover rates. There's a lot of pressure on the few paid roles that exist in rural communities. I mean, that can be local politics, it can be the various challenges of just moving projects forward. But point being, turnover can be really high, and that leads to frequent loss of knowledge and experience in some of these roles that are working on contaminated site projects. Funding and costs, these, arguably, these are also a capacity issue, but they are such a significant barrier. I wanted to break it out. Site work in Alaska is super expensive. Yeah, there's so much to say about that, but mobilizing contractors, shipping samples out of state for analysis at labs, transporting equipment, again, off the road system, shipping waste and hazardous materials to qualified disposal facilities in Washington and Oregon. That can often double project costs compared to other areas of the US that are more physically accessible. Grant funding programs for contaminated sites do exist, but I've worked with some tribes in Alaska who have struggled to apply for federal grants in particular, just because of the burdensome application requirements. Language barriers can be a real challenge. And then again, just the high cost of doing work. I've seen contaminated site funding applications from Alaska tribes that have actually been rejected because the reviewers thought that the tribe had artificially inflated their budgets. So, that's a misconception that we try to correct whenever we can, which is, again, why I'm kind of trying to speak to this issue wherever I can. But something that a lot of folks don't realize is, specifically within the brownfields program, Alaska tribes aren't even eligible for many of the competitive EPA brownfield grants. And then any number of reasons behind that, but mainly just how Congress interpreted tribal land ownership in Alaska when they were creating the brownfields program and putting into statute. And that's a huge chunk of the money that's available to address these sites. So that is a huge barrier. Even when tribes do successfully secure grants up here, again, everything's so expensive. I'm sure this is something that you all have faced as well with your projects. Funding rarely covers the whole scope of needed cleanup on a site. And tribal programs have, in my experience, kind of limited ability to braid and combine funding across agencies sometimes because of just the funding terms that are in place. And some really common contamination issues don't even have any funding sources at all. Just as an example, I think around 75% of all contaminated sites in Alaska are petroleum, or at least partially impacted by petroleum. I mentioned home heating oil earlier. Home heating oil tanks are one of the most common offenders of spills up here in Alaska, but there is currently no funding assistance program for homeowners to inspect, maintain, replace their home heating oil tanks. And that leads to a lot of degradation and frequent spills, especially in rural communities where, again, it's harder to get these supplies out there. So yeah, I could go on and on about costs, but hopefully that gives a little bit of a picture there. Technology as well. I'm not saying that Alaska certainly is not living in the Stone Age here. That's not what I want to say, but we do lack some technology up here to test for certain things. One that you all may be familiar with is PFAS. That's a pretty important contaminant that's affecting a lot of communities up here. We don't have any labs in Alaska who can test for PFAS. So that's something that we have to outsource, ship across the country, often to labs on the East Coast. And if you've ever sent samples to a lab, you've probably become familiar with all of the logistical requirements of filling out the paperwork, getting it in the cooler. There's temperature requirements for shipping samples. For these smaller communities, there are really limited flights in and out. And that can compromise sample integrity by the time they make it across the country. So there's a lot of very particular considerations we have to take when we're doing sampling. Some rural communities in Alaska sometimes do struggle with reliable electricity, internet, equipment, again, temperature control, things like that we need to do this kind of work. So that does limit the types of interventions, monitoring technologies, cleanup methods, site controls, any number of things that may be used on a site that would be easy to implement elsewhere. And we're seeing even more challenges to that because of infrastructure damage, erosion, permafrost degradation. All of these things are escalating a lot up here in the Arctic, and we've been seeing that compounding these challenges for some communities on contaminated sites. Some of you may have seen what's going on in Western Alaska right now with Typhoon Halong and the impacts to communities out there. I can't overstate how much pollution and contamination has resulted from just those storms impacting buildings, infrastructure, washing away home heating oil tanks, even pre-existing sites that had been previously cleaned up. These storms are eroding away those caps and controls. So anyways, not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but yeah, infrastructure struggles are becoming more and more severe. And then logistically too, just operations and maintenance, O&M, that's something that we have to plan a little bit more deliberately for when we're trying to figure out what site interventions or cleanup methods we want to use, because a lot of the methods and equipment for contaminant removal require, component replacements sometimes for equipment, calibrations, skilled technical maintenance, right? Those things may not be as feasible in communities with few trained technical staff, or where it's harder to get things in and out. Shipping and supply chain delays are really, really common here, especially in winter. I mean, weather is a big consideration. So, like in the Aleutian Islands, heading out towards the Pacific, communities out there on those islands, they get a barge coming out maybe once or twice a year where they can ship things in, like heavy equipment. So if something breaks down, I mean, it might literally be years before a replacement's available to continue that project. And so that's something that we really have to take into consideration when we're planning out these projects, is how sustainable is the operations and maintenance going to be if something happens. And lastly, I mean, I say lastly, there's all sorts of things we could talk about, but at least for this presentation, a little bit less tangible, but no less important. We see a lot of challenges around information access up here as well. Historical site data for contaminated sites in Alaska is often incomplete or outdated. Record keeping up here, especially in smaller communities, is not necessarily as robust as it is elsewhere. There's no statutory requirement in Alaska to even file deeds for land transfers. So when we're trying to figure out ownership determinations to see who might be able to pay for a cleanup, that can be really complicated. And a lot of maps and information sources that are available in larger towns or cities just simply do not exist. For rural villages, they have just never been generated. So there's a lot of satellite imagery that we rely on, lots of historical records, and there's just a lot of detective work. We kind of joke around that the FBI should hire us because we have gotten that good at like forensically drilling down into, okay, there's this blurry photo from 1971. Was this tiny little structure there then or not? But if you're not experienced with that sort of data mining, then that can be really challenging. CERCLA, the CERCLA statute, which is the law, that's the law that allows EPA to clean up hazardous waste and contaminated sites and hold parties responsible for cleanup costs. That statute does not include the word tribe in their definition of person. Alaska statute, on the other hand, has the phrase any other entity whatsoever in their definition of person. That includes tribes, obviously. So what that means is where the federal government may not consider a tribe in Alaska to be a responsible party and expect them to pay for cleanup costs, the state of Alaska might come in and say, we don't think so. You're on the hook. So this is why I wanted to mention confusing legal issues, because when even the state and federal courts cannot agree on how tribes should be treated legally, it's very hard for tribes up here to determine how to move forward with a contaminated site. There can be a lot of anxiety in tribal communities about coming forward to report contaminated site concerns because they don't know who's going to come after them for that. They don't know how they're going to be what their status is going to be determined legally and their liability. On data, I mentioned this earlier, but contaminated site data, part of the challenge behind tracking that down is how fragmented it is. It's spread out over a ton of different databases. The state of Alaska has some site information. EPA has some. The Army Corps has some. Bureau of Land Management has some. DOD has some. And they're all using different lat-long systems. They're all using, like, some are using polygons, some are using, they're all different formats. There's no single statewide or federal portal that integrates all of the known contaminated site data out there. So a lot of work that we help tribes do is cross-checking all of these different systems manually for every single individual contaminated site. These are not user-friendly. And again, if you're in a community that doesn't have reliable internet, it is really difficult to get on these databases. And it's not like you're going to just walk into a government office and ask for it in person. That would require multiple flights. So it can be very challenging to just get baseline information from databases that are more accessible for us. And then lastly, I had mentioned language barriers earlier. That applies to information sharing too. Culturally appropriate communication of contaminant impacts and risks has not historically been a huge strength in Alaska. Just as one example, after Typhoon Merbok in 2022, FEMA created some resource guidance for impacted tribal communities that they had translated to Yupik. And I say Yupik in quotes. It turns out they had contracted a company, I think it was from California or Nevada, to do that translation. And they were complete gibberish. They were meaningless. They delivered these fact sheets to communities and they were like, we have absolutely no idea what you are trying to say to us right now. And that's just one example. We see these kinds of barriers in all sorts of ways in contaminated site work. It really limits the level of local engagement that can happen and the power that tribes have up here to make informed decisions for themselves. So that's something that we take seriously as a program and technical assistance provider, is just making sure that that information is accessible to communities that want it. And I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush here. None of this is to say that tribes in Alaska and rural communities are not knowledgeable about contaminated site issues, because there are plenty of tribes who have been huge champions of these issues. It's entirely dependent on the community and the individual, but this is just based on feedback that our programs received from tribes about the types of challenges and barriers that they are experiencing to their work, and their desire to have that become more broadly understood. Even if a tribe feels they know what issues and what contaminants they have in their community, what we've heard is that they don't necessarily know what that means in terms of the specific risks to their people, to their subsistence foods. There's kind of been a lack of adequate studies on contaminant impacts to subsistence foods up here. And again, as I mentioned earlier, whether or not they're going to be financially liable for all of that. So making that information accessible, helping people work through those questions is something that we try to do as much as we can. So I know I just shared a lot of challenges. I hope that doesn't make anyone feel like tribes in Alaska are just doomed to suffer contaminated site issues forever with no resolution. That's certainly not the case. It just requires some extra creativity and special understanding of how to do work up here. I feel like this is kind of a preaching to the choir slide, because I know this audience is probably already very aware of these things already, but just looking ahead to ensure that future tribal contaminated site projects succeed in Alaska and elsewhere. These are just a few of my thoughts as a technical assistance provider. I do feel like tribal environmental staff are always going to be the front line of brownfields and contaminated site work. It's not us, it's not technical assistance providers, it's not EPA, it is the people living in communities on the ground living with those sites. So just continuing to invest in training and peer mentorship and sustained funding for tribal positions is really, really important. And expanding opportunities for that training and knowledge through, I would like to think programs like Tribal Tab, or certainly the Native Learning Center. These things I think are really important, just to make sure that tribes have the tools they need to do the work, and also making sure that knowledge stays within communities too. I talked about this earlier, but state and federal and tribal partners all hold different pieces of the contaminated site picture. So developing shared data portals, standardizing the formats in which we are collecting information and making information accessible, having really transparent record sharing processes from agencies would, in my opinion, really go a long way to help tribes make informed decisions about contaminated sites a lot faster. And just simplifying access to databases, clarifying points of contact at different agencies. Those are small steps that I think can have really big impacts. Tribes in general, but particularly in Alaska, need just more resources than they are eligible for right now. For these projects to succeed, tribes really require direct access to funds and flexible grant terms that they can adapt easily to evolving circumstances. We're all in a ton of evolving circumstances all the time right now, but also combine well with other resources just to finish projects, to get those across the finish line, and clear eligibility pathways for the funding resources that already do exist. And then lastly, just strong support for long-term community planning. Reuse and site planning is a big piece of the brownfield picture in particular, because the reuse plan is an important component of those types of sites. So just being aware that cleanup is only one part of community resilience and how these sites can play into that. I think that integrating contaminated site management with things like infrastructure planning, housing, renewable energy, climate change adaptation planning, all of those things can help ensure that cleanup projects aren't just about getting the site clean. They also support the tribe's broader health and economic and community goals. And all of these things on this slide, I think are goals and values that the Tribal Tab program certainly supports, that our partners in the program support. And that's, why I'm really proud to be part of this program and an assistance provider through Tribal Tab. So yeah, that's all I had to share today. I, appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing up here in the Arctic for contaminated sites work. And I always love learning from tribes in other regions to talk about shared challenges and brainstorm solutions together. So yeah, thanks again.
Thank you so much, Todd and Bailey. That was fantastic. We'd like to open it up a little bit to if there are questions or comments or clarifications, anything like that. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, Bailey, I don't know if you caught this one in the chat. Someone had asked what kinds of contamination is there in Alaska. I don't know if you had already answered that one. Sorry.
No, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I did miss that. So, I mentioned earlier that around 3/4 of the sites that we have up here are petroleum impacted. So, the home heating oil tanks is one piece of that. Rural communities also rely a lot on like bulk tank farms because, they have to get fuel delivered a few times a year by barge or something else. It's not easy to just casually get fuel. So they have these humongous tanks that store fuel for the community. That requires special maintenance and special training that isn't always easy to get. And so we do see a lot of spills from bulk fuel facilities in rural communities. There's also been a very significant military history and presence in Alaska. And so there are a lot of military sites across the state. I mean, the Aleutians still sees a lot of lingering impacts from World War II installations. I'm working with one community right now that has unexploded ordnances from, suspected Japanese presence out in the Aleutians. So the military can be a big one. Mining sites. Obviously, Alaska is a huge natural resource, extraction area. And so mining is one big piece of that, especially tribes in the Southeast deal a lot with mines and also impacts from transboundary mines in British Columbia. Those are some of the really big sources. But conversely, some of the types of sites that we might not see as often as, other larger communities or communities down in the lower 48 states are things like industrial, like mass industrial sites. I mean, that's not really going on as much, obviously, in a community with like 300 people, and things like dry cleaners and stuff like that. So it does look a little bit different, but I will say we do still have all of the same types of contaminants up here, just maybe in slightly different ratios, if that makes sense. So yeah, thanks for your question.
I don't know if we have any other questions, but I would like to put in a plug just with respect to both of you, Todd and Bailey. Both of you organize, convene, and really administer very powerful environmental conferences that really bring in and invite a lot of different communities. And just really briefly, didn't know if, Todd or Bailey, anything you wanted to mention about those upcoming events or any plans or anything like that before we close?
Well, I will put a plug in for the conference that our department hosts every March. It's called the Alaska Tribal Conference on Environmental Management. It's the largest tribal environmental conference we have in Alaska, and we do have folks coming up from other states every year just to share and learn. So you are all more than welcome and invited to attend that in Anchorage at the end of March. I think that's the plug I'll put in now. But we're always looking for opportunities to partner and share information. So feel free to reach out.
I will say I cannot actually announce the actual dates or location of the 2026 Tribal Lands and Environment Forum, but I literally have a pile of proposals sitting right to my left. And my team and I were just going through them yesterday. We're this close to being able to actually make the announcement. I think we've made a decision, but we just haven't gone public on it. So again, by all means, please feel free to go ahead and reach out to me. If you'd like to be on the mailing list that my team and I actually have, that's one way to definitely keep in touch with plans for the Tribal Lands and Environment Forum, as well as other things. I guess I want to turn it around a little bit and kind of like throw it back out, I guess, to the rest of the attendees. I do know that having come to a couple of these trainings that you all have done in the past, many of you are probably going to be coming from more of a housing or community development or a budget or finance kind of background. And this might not necessarily be like, the sandbox that you have to actually spend all your time in. I just want to make a plug for definitely please do feel free to reach out to any of the three of us to make sure that you're actually on the Tribal Tab listserv, because we would love to actually have people with your background and your expertise participating in the Tribal Brownfields Knowledge Circle. As Bailey and Aurel were actually saying, when we're working on these kind of brownfield issues, some of the most crucial aspects of those are going to be intersecting with community development. I will tell you from firsthand experience of 20 plus years of working with an awful lot of tribes on contaminated sites, a lot of times even the environmental staff might not necessarily be talking to the finance experts or the budgetary experts. They need to actually sort of, quite frankly, learn from you all. So if you're at all interested in learning more about brownfields, come to the Knowledge Circle. And if you would like to share some of your knowledge that you actually have, please come to the Knowledge Circle. I think it would definitely be a wonderful two-way street for all of you. So I just wanted to make that plug.
Thank you so much, Todd. And thank you, Bailey. And just we wanted to really offer special thanks to Brooke and Georgette and team for this fantastic opportunity. And I know there'll be some really cool and amazing things to follow. So yeah, and Brooke, I didn't know if you had a follow-up kind of evaluation survey.
Sorry, y'all. Yeah, I turned on my camera to do the outro a little too early, and then I was like, do I turn it off? I turn it back on. So sorry about that. I did want to share. I have put the link into the chat real quick before anybody leaves. If y'all could just take a few minutes to complete the webinar feedback survey. It is anonymous. You don't have to worry about your email or anything being attached, but it helps us at the Native Learning Center know what's working well with our Cathedra webinars, what we can improve upon for the future. There is even a section where you can suggest future topics for us to try to get. But it's feedback that we share with our presenters as well. So it does help everybody all around if y'all wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to complete that for us. And again, it is anonymous, so no fear of your name or email or anything like that being attached to it. We do hope you can join us for our next webinar. That's going to be next week on Tuesday. This one will be on how to write a business plan. This will be with Russ Siegel. He's a trainer and facilitator with Siegel Management Consulting, and he used to manage a major CDFI. So he knows his stuff. You can check out this as well as our other recorded webinars on our YouTube channel. There is a full playlist called the Cathedra Webinar Archive, and I will stick a link for that into the chat right now as well. This recording won't generate until tomorrow morning, but I will post it to the course here on the learning platform, as well as putting it on our YouTube channel. So if you need to rewind and check out anything, review, share it with a colleague, feel free to do so. I'll have it posted tomorrow morning. Feel free to also check out our other upcoming training events. We post about them to our various social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And if you are somebody who enjoys listening to podcasts, we do have an in-house produced one, the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast, where we explore more micro topics within tribal housing and self-determination. If you like to view the interviews with our guests instead of just listening to it, we post those recordings to our YouTube channel as well. There's another playlist, Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. But otherwise, thank you so much to our three wonderful instructors. That was very informative. We really appreciate y'all coming on today and sharing this exceptional and valuable information. I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of the day. You're getting some love in the chat. Francine said thank you, as well as well, I lost the other name, but you're getting some love in the chat. And I will go ahead and turn off the recording now, y'all, but I am going to leave the meeting open so that if you do want to take